I knew something was wrong the moment I heard laughter in my house, laughter that didn't belong to me. It was a woman's laughter, soft, nervous, breathless, the kind of sound a woman makes when she knows she's somewhere she shouldn't be. I was standing in my own hallway, holding a bag of groceries to my chest so tight that the plastic cut into my fingers. My keys were still in the lock behind me. I hadn't even closed the door yet. The refrigerator hummed from the kitchen, and beneath it, beneath all the normal sounds that once meant home, there was that laugh. And his voice. Low, familiar, intimate. Not the tone he used with me. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I walked slowly, as if any sudden movement would shatter whatever illusion I still wanted to believe about my life. The living room came first, empty, a wine glass on the coffee table, his jacket tossed across the armchair. A scent I didn't recognize, sweet and floral, hung in the air like a confession. My heartbeat wasn't fast. It was slow, heavy, like something forcing its way through stone. Then another sound, not laughter this time, but a whisper, coming from down the hallway. Our bedroom door was half closed. That's what broke me, more than anything. They didn't even bother to close it all the way. When I pushed that door open, I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not throw anything. I remember that moment with an eerie, surgical clarity, as if I stepped outside of myself and became someone watching a life end from the ceiling. He was in my bed, our bed, sheets tangled around two bodies, her head snapped toward me, eyes wide, hair spilling across my pillow like a stain that would never wash out. He didn't even have shock in his face, just annoyance first, then panic. I set the grocery bag down on the dresser without a sound. Apples rolled onto the floor, knocking into the leg of the bed like a quiet drum. He sat up. She pulled the blanket to her chest. And I just looked at him. Not hurt him. Because she didn't owe me a life. He did. He started to speak, her name maybe, or mine, but I lifted one hand and the gesture alone silenced him. My voice, when it came, was almost tender. Finish what you started. I'm not interrupting. He looked like I had slapped him. She looked like she might disappear into the mattress. I didn't stay. I didn't watch. I didn't collapse. I walked out the same way I walked in, slowly, on my own feet, with dignity intact because that was all I had left. In the car, I sat in silence for a long time, staring at my own hands on the steering wheel. They weren't shaking. My whole body felt anesthetized, like someone had turned my heart off at a switch. People think betrayal feels like fire. It doesn't. It feels like ice, still, clean, absolute. That night I didn't go back, not to fight, not to plead, not to give him the satisfaction of a scene. I booked a hotel room with the same numbness one might reserve a conference room or order takeout. I took a shower so hot it burned, but I still couldn't feel anything. Not anger, not grief, not jealousy. Just the quiet knowledge that something had ended with a soundless crack, like glass breaking under a pillow. I left him without a note, without a warning, without a second look. He sent messages, called, left voicemails. I didn't listen to any of them. Because when you see the truth with your own eyes, you don't need explanations. I built my silence like a wall and stayed there until the world stopped spinning. I thought the humiliation of that day would be the last chapter of our story, the final page. I had no idea that months later, when I had rebuilt my life without him, when my name and his name no longer belonged in the same sentence, he would come back to me on his knees, choking on tears, begging me to save him from losing everything. And that was the day I learned that life has a way of bringing the ones who destroy you back to your door, not for reconciliation, but for reckoning. I used to think marriage would be a partnership of two hearts beating together, a shared rhythm that endured the quiet days and the stormy ones. With Michael, it hadn't exactly turned out that way. Our life together had become functional, orderly, predictable, polite routines, polite silences, and polite smiles. Some days I would wake before him and make coffee, the rich aroma filling the kitchen while he lingered under the covers. In the early years, that smell had been a signal for laughter and conversation. Now, it was just the smell of morning, comforting but hollow. He would finally rise, glance at the cup I had set before him, nod, and sip without a word. The absence of warmth was the loudest sound in the room. We didn't argue, we didn't fight, but we didn't connect either. Dinner was mechanical. I'd prepare it, he'd eat it, we'd retreat to our corners. Conversation had become perfunctory, a short, "How was your day?" answered with a clipped "Fine." No laughter, no sharing, no softness. I often caught myself glancing at him, remembering the man he had been in the first years of our marriage and feeling a quiet ache. There were glimpses of what had once been. A hand brushing mine while reaching for the same plate, a memory of shared laughter echoing in the kitchen, a fleeting smile at something remembered. But those moments were brief, fragile, easily broken by the distance that now defined our lives. The house smelled of meals and cologne, but there was no life between us, just presence. Weekends offered only the illusion of togetherness. We would occasionally go out dinner, a walk in the park, attempting to revive something that had long faded. But the effort felt staged. We walked side by side, our gestures polite, our words minimal. The distance was not dramatic, not explosive, just persistent, a slow erosion of connection that no small act could repair. Even our home life was compartmentalized. I handled the chores and meals. He took care of his work and tasks. We lived under the same roof, but in separate worlds. I folded laundry while he tinkered with something in the garage. I cleaned the kitchen while he retreated to his office. Our interactions were scheduled, functional, devoid of intimacy. I often sat quietly, holding a cup of tea, thinking about the early days. Our first apartment, painted a cheerful yellow, smelled of fresh paint and hope. We had laughed, planned, dreamed. Those memories clung to me, bittersweet reminders of what had once been possible. They anchored me, kept me from leaving, even as I felt the slow, unyielding pull of absence between us. Evenings were hardest. He would retreat to his corner, I to mine. We would watch the same show or read in silence. Sometimes I wanted to reach across, to touch his hand, to speak words that mattered. But the hesitation stopped me. Words no longer carried the weight they once had. Gestures no longer held meaning. It was easier to pretend the distance was normal than to confront its emptiness. And yet, despite all this, there was familiarity, a rhythm we both knew, a quiet routine that sustained us. We were like two dancers moving in separate spaces, each step precise, each motion predictable. There was no warmth, but there was also no chaos. That in itself had become a kind of comfort. I often wondered how long we could sustain it, this life of quiet routines and careful politeness. How long before something small broke the fragile surface? How long before the absence of connection became too heavy to bear? And yet, for all the emptiness, I clung to the life we had built. Not because it was happy, but because it was ours, and because letting go of it felt impossible. In the soft glow of the kitchen light, the hum of the fridge, and the muted ticking of the clock, I sometimes allowed myself to imagine the possibility of warmth returning. Not the past, not the laughter we'd lost, but a subtle reconnection, a spark that might remind us that love once lived here. Those moments were fleeting, but they were enough to keep me in the quiet, orderly, functional life we shared. And so, our marriage continued in its muted rhythm, two people living together, each aware of the distance, each pretending the distance was not there, each holding on to the memory of something that had once been full of life. That was our normal. That was our world. And I clung to it quietly because even emptiness has its familiarity, and leaving seemed impossible. It started small, a detail so ordinary I almost didn't notice it at first. Michael had always left the mail on the counter, bills, letters, occasional junk. That day, a stack of unopened envelopes sat neatly by the phone, but something was off. He didn't glance at them. He didn't shuffle through them like he usually did. He walked in, eyes flicking toward the stack, and froze for a moment, just long enough to make my stomach tighten. "I'll take care of these," he said quickly, gathering them in his arms. The way he clutched them was strange, protective, almost fearful. There was no greeting, no small talk, just a hurried attempt to hide what had been left in plain sight. I frowned, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Work stress, I told myself. Maybe taxes, maybe an overdue notice. But the unease settled deep in my chest. That night, he didn't sit in the living room as usual. Instead, he disappeared into the garage with his briefcase. I could hear the faint click of the light, the low scrape of his shoes against the concrete. He stayed there for over an hour. Not a sound of papers being moved, not a whispered phone call, just stillness. But stillness like a shield, like someone guarding something fragile or dangerous. When he returned, his expression was carefully neutral. He kissed my cheek, an echo of affection almost automatic, and said, "Don't worry about it, I've got it handled." I nodded, forcing calm, but the feeling of suspicion had already planted itself firmly in my mind. Something was wrong. A few days later, another detail caught my attention. His phone, once casually left on the kitchen counter, now followed him everywhere. To the office, the bedroom, even the bathroom. Calls were taken outside. Texts typed with the screen angled away from me. He was hiding something, but it wasn't a woman. The tension in his gestures, the way his fingers trembled slightly as he declined a call, told me it was something else entirely. I tried to dismiss it. "Work is stressful," I whispered to myself, but the tremor in his hands was subtle evidence I could not ignore. A man doesn't shake over romance. A man shakes over debt, over obligations, over something that could unravel him if discovered. Then came the look, the one that made my stomach drop. We were at brunch with friends, the casual chatter about their home renovations, budgeting, and plans for the future. Michael laughed at the jokes, but it wasn't the same laugh. It cracked in the middle, uneven and hollow. He gripped his glass too tightly. A vein popped in his temple. My friends noticed nothing, but I did. And when Daniel joked about selling the house if worst comes to worst, Michael's fork clattered against his plate. He didn't smile, didn't even blink. I remember the precise moment I knew that what he was hiding wasn't small. It had weight. It had consequences. It had the power to destroy. That night I dreamed of a house with no walls. Furniture was exposed, floating in the open air. The wind blew through every room. I woke with my chest tight, the dream leaving a heaviness in my limbs. I knew, without fully understanding how, that something important was being concealed from me, something dangerous. I tried to ignore it. I busied myself with chores, work, and errands. But my eyes kept darting to him, watching for signs, looking for cracks, listening for hesitation in his voice, and I began to notice patterns I hadn't seen before. Short replies, evasive gestures, a sudden attentiveness to messages that I could not read. The subtle shift in behavior was undeniable. I remember standing in the kitchen one evening, holding a mug of tea, watching him across the room. He was absorbed in his laptop, but his attention kept flicking to his briefcase at his side. The sight of it, ordinary, unassuming, made my heart pound. I couldn't articulate it yet, but I felt the weight of something looming over us. It wasn't just suspicion. It was a creeping certainty. I didn't know the full truth, but I could feel it. The air between us shifted imperceptibly, carrying the tension of secrets and the quiet dread of consequences. And in that space, in that ordinary evening stretched thin with unease, I understood for the first time that our life, which had felt empty but manageable, was about to be disrupted in a way that would demand more than calm observation. Something was coming, something that would force me to confront the reality of Michael's world, and ultimately my own choices. I never imagined that a single evening could unravel everything I thought I knew. It began with the sound of the front door clicking shut behind him, though he was supposed to be home hours later. My stomach twisted as I walked toward the living room, sensing something was off. Michael was hunched over the coffee table, papers strewn around him like shards of broken promises. Envelopes, bank statements, bills I had never seen before, they were stacked in disorganized piles, each one a silent accusation. My hands froze on the doorknob, and for a moment I simply watched him, trying to make sense of the scene. "Michael," I whispered. He looked up, startled, his eyes wide and unguarded for the first time in months. I didn't want you to see this," he said, voice tight, shaky. The words weren't reassuring. They were a warning. I stepped closer, scanning the documents. Bank notices, foreclosure warnings, unpaid invoices, and letters marked urgent in bold red ink. My heart dropped into my chest. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, the tremor in my voice betraying my attempt at calm. He swallowed hard, running his hands through his hair. I thought I could fix it before it got this bad. Fix it? Michael, this is bankruptcy, I said, voice rising despite myself. How could you hide this from me? The betrayal didn't come from infidelity or lies about love. It came from the fact that I had been living under the illusion of normalcy while our life, our future, was quietly crumbling around us. He had hidden it from me. Every day, every conversation, every shared meal had been tainted by omission. I sank into the couch, holding my head in my hands, trying to process it. I wanted to cry, to scream, to leave all at once. The man I thought I knew, the partner I had tolerated and endured in silence for years, had kept the largest secret of our lives from me. I didn't want to worry you, he murmured, sitting beside me, placing a tentative hand on my shoulder. I shook my head. You didn't want to worry me. Michael, you've been leading me through a lie. I didn't know we were standing on the edge of losing everything. His hand fell from my shoulder. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, deflated by shame and desperation. I thought if I could just make it right, if I could get the money somehow, it would be okay. Make it right. You should have told me the truth. We're supposed to be partners. I could feel anger, disappointment, and heartbreak twisting inside me. The intimacy we had lost over years of quiet routines had become a chasm, and now, this revelation had widened it into a canyon. I stood abruptly, packing the room, gesturing at the piles of papers. Do you understand what you've done? You didn't just risk your own future, you risked ours. Every plan, every dream, every little thing we thought we had gone, and you thought hiding it would help. He looked at me with a mix of guilt and fear. I panicked. I didn't know where else to turn. I thought if I begged you, if I asked you to help, maybe it could work. His words hit me in waves. The man I had been living beside, tolerating silence and distance, was now begging not for forgiveness, but for rescue. I sat back down, trembling, my mind racing. For years, I had tolerated emptiness, sadness, quiet ache, but this was different. This was betrayal of trust, the kind that shakes the foundation of everything. And yet, beneath the rage and hurt, there was a tiny flicker of something else, a moral question. Could I forgive him? Could I help him? Could I save what we had left? For a long moment, the room was silent except for the ticking of the clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. I looked at him, really looked, and saw fear, desperation, and a glimmer of the man I had once loved. But I also saw the recklessness that had brought us here. Michael, I said finally, voice low but firm, you should have told me. I could have helped, we could have faced this together. But instead, you made me live a lie. He nodded, tears forming at the corners of his eyes, a man stripped bare not just by circumstance, but by his own choices. I know I was wrong, I am begging you. Please help me. And that was the moment when everything changed. My life, our life, the quiet routines, the polite silences, none of it could exist the same way after this. I realized that love or loyalty or whatever had been holding me in place could not return me to the way things were. Not now. The betrayal was complete, but so was the test. I had to decide, and I knew deep down that whatever choice I made would shape the rest of our lives. I took a deep breath, steadying myself against the rush of emotion, and for the first time in months, I spoke the truth I had been holding back. I left, Michael. I can't live like this anymore, and now you're asking me to save you. His face fell. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The silence was deafening. I felt the weight of every hidden letter, every unspoken word, every day of polite distance. I knew the next step, whether to forgive, to help, to walk away, would be the hardest decision of my life. And in that moment, I realized, sometimes betrayal isn't just about what someone hides. It's about the power they have over your choices and whether you will let them dictate your life, even after they've broken your trust. I left the room and walked down the hall, my hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the sudden weight of decision pressing down on me. I had lived with quiet emptiness for years, but this was different. This was betrayal by omission, by hiding the very foundation of our lives. And now, Michael was standing there, hoping I would fix it for him. I went to the kitchen, filled a glass of water, and stared at the reflection in the window. I could see the woman I had become, cautious, wary, tired of making excuses, tired of walking on tiptoe around someone else's secrets. A lifetime of politeness and patience had led me here, to a point where I had to act, not react, but act deliberately. I returned to the living room, facing him. "Michael, this isn't about money," I said firmly. "It's about trust. You didn't just hide the bills, you hid our future. You treated me like a stranger in my own life." He nodded, swallowing hard. I could see the guilt etched into every line of his face. "I know. I panicked. I thought I could handle it before you ever found out." I shook my head. "You didn't handle it. You buried it. And now I have to decide if I even want to dig it up with you." I spent the next hour going through the papers with him, not because I wanted to fix everything, but because I needed to see the full truth. Each statement, each overdue notice, each letter of warning felt like a hammer striking the fragile remnants of our life together. My hands trembled, but I took notes, cataloged dates, calculated what could be salvaged. And in that moment, I realized something about myself, about the woman I had become. I was tired of being silent. I was tired of allowing my life to be dictated by someone else's mistakes. I could help him, yes, but I would not do it blindly. I would not do it out of obligation or pity. I would act on my own terms. "Here, what we're going to do," I told him, setting the papers down firmly. "We list everything, every debt, every obligation. We find out what can be negotiated, and you're going to be completely honest with me from now on, no more secrets." He swallowed, nodded, relief and fear mingling in his expression. "I can do that. I swear no more hiding." "Good," I said, voice steady. "Because if you slip, if you lie, I walk. I don't care how much money you owe or how much we can save. I will not live under lies anymore." For the first time in months, I felt a sense of control. The betrayal was still raw, but action, deliberate, measured, firm, brought clarity. I wasn't just reacting to his panic. I was reclaiming my agency. Over the following weeks, we met with accountants, financial advisors, and legal counsel. Michael was compliant but tense, and I watched every gesture, every word, every hesitation. I made him answer questions I didn't even know I wanted answers to. How much money was unaccounted for? Which creditors were the most urgent? What steps had he taken without telling me? It wasn't easy. It wasn't comfortable. It was exhausting and emotionally draining. And yet, in that exhaustion, I found a strange clarity. I had been giving my energy to maintain appearances for too long. Now, my energy was focused on reality, not illusions, not routines, not polite silences, but truth. One evening, after a long session of calculations and calls, I watched him as he slumped into the couch, head in hands. I could see how much fear and desperation weighed him down. But I also saw that he finally understood the magnitude of his actions, the depth of the betrayal. "I don't deserve this," he muttered. I looked at him, my expression firm. "Maybe not, but you need it. You need me to see what you've done and make it real so you don't make it again." And I knew then that helping him would not be easy. It would require boundaries, vigilance, and an unwavering commitment to my own integrity. I could guide him, support him, and hold him accountable, but I would not save him blindly. Not anymore. That night I lay awake, thinking about what had happened, about the emptiness of the life we had shared, and about the choices I had made. I had chosen action over passivity, honesty over silence, agency over tolerance. And though the road ahead was uncertain, I felt stronger than I had in years. I realized something fundamental. Betrayal doesn't just damage relationships. It tests them. It forces you to confront yourself, your limits, and your willingness to engage with someone who has faltered. And sometimes, in the midst of betrayal, you find your own strength, a strength you never knew existed until the ground beneath you shifted. By the time I finally fell asleep that night, I knew one thing. The life we had once known was gone. But the life we were about to build with truth, boundaries, and clear-eyed decisions might just be worth the effort. And I would face it on my terms, not his. The truth has a way of escaping, even when you try to hold it close. I had hoped that Michael's financial collapse could be managed quietly, contained within the walls of our home between us. But secrets like these have a life of their own, and eventually, the world notices. It started with a phone call from his business partner. I could hear the tension in the line before any words were spoken. "Everyone's finding out, Michael. People are talking." The words hit me like a stone in the chest. I knew then that no matter how carefully we had planned our response, the news of his bankruptcy was no longer ours alone. Colleagues, friends, even distant acquaintances, all would soon learn the truth. I remember the first awkward encounter. I was at the grocery store when a neighbor approached, hesitant, awkward. "I heard about your husband," she said softly, glancing around. The look in her eyes was curious, judgmental, yet sympathetic. My stomach twisted. I realized then that what had been private was now public knowledge. The embarrassment, the whispers, the polite inquiries, it all fell on me as much as it did on him. At work, Michael's absence became a topic. People asked questions I wasn't prepared to answer, nodding and whispering behind his back. I felt exposed, as if every private mistake had been painted in neon lights for the entire world to see. And yet I also noticed something unexpected. Some people, those closest to us, responded with dignity. They didn't gawk, they didn't judge. They offered help in quiet ways, a message, a meal, a listening ear. It reminded me that while betrayal and failure could humiliate, honesty and accountability could also garner respect. Michael faced inquiries from creditors, calls from banks, letters from lawyers. He was forced to confront the consequences of his choices publicly. I watched him sit through meetings, take calls in the living room, and answer questions he had once evaded. It was painful to see him humbled, stripped of pride, and yet there was a justice in it. The world now understood the gravity of what had been hidden. Even friends we trusted were affected. Some were angry, some confused, some simply wanted to help. I had to navigate the delicate balance of speaking the truth without oversharing, of defending our family without defending his mistakes. I realized that public consequence is not just punishment, it's accountability, a mirror reflecting your choices to everyone around you. I could see the weight on Michael's shoulders. For the first time, he seemed fully aware of how his actions had rippled outward, impacting not just himself but those who cared about him. It was a humbling, almost cleansing experience, painful but necessary. I also learned something about myself during this time. I had felt powerless when the betrayal first came to light, but as the public consequences unfolded, I realized my voice mattered. My decisions, my responses, my boundaries, they shaped not just our private life but the public perception of it. I could choose dignity over panic, clarity over chaos, and strength over despair. By the time the initial wave of gossip and inquiries subsided, Michael had faced his creditors, explained the situation to friends and family, and taken steps to rebuild. I had stood by him, not out of blind loyalty, but out of commitment to the life we had chosen together, carefully, deliberately, with eyes wide open. And in that process, I discovered a strange kind of relief. The truth, once hidden, had a way of liberating everyone involved. Yes, there was embarrassment, yes, there was shame, but there was also honesty, transparency, and a foundation for rebuilding. That was the lesson I carried with me. Consequences are unavoidable, but how we face them defines the difference between destruction and redemption. And as I watched Michael slowly regain his footing, humbled but conscious, I realized that even public shame could be transformed into a starting point for a new, better life. Time has a way of softening the sharp edges of betrayal. In the weeks and months after Michael's bankruptcy became public, our home began to feel different, not the old warmth of early love, but a quieter, more grounded sense of reality. We no longer spoke in the empty routines that had filled our life before. Conversations became intentional. If a question was asked, an answer followed with honesty. If a plan was made, it was followed through. The emptiness that had hung over us like a shadow began to lift, replaced by a cautious hope that things could be rebuilt, not exactly as they were, but in a stronger, more truthful form. Michael changed too. The desperation that had haunted him vanished slowly, replaced by accountability. He paid his debts, apologized to those he had wronged, and most importantly, faced me not as a man begging for help, but as a partner willing to take responsibility. It was not easy for him, and it was not easy for me. I had to forgive, not to forget, but to reclaim peace for myself. I took long walks in the evenings, sometimes alone, sometimes with Michael following at a respectful distance. We talked about small things at first, the changing leaves, the neighbor's garden, plans for the weekend. Gradually, we began discussing bigger matters, budgets, responsibilities, even memories of the life we had shared before silence had taken over. It was awkward at times, but it was alive. One night, I found myself laughing at a small joke he made. It was a sound that surprised me, sharp and bright in the quiet living room. He smiled, a genuine smile that didn't feel forced or rehearsed. In that moment, I felt the tiniest spark of what we had once been. It wasn't blazing, but it was there, and it was enough to remind me that healing is possible, even after deep wounds. We began to rebuild routines, simple ones. Shared meals without distraction, evenings spent discussing plans, even the occasional quiet moment of connection. The intimacy was not sudden. It crept in like the first light of dawn, gradual and soft. It was real, earned, and mindful, not taken for granted. I also discovered a new strength in myself. For years, I had tolerated distance, forgave absence, and endured silent neglect. Now, I realized that my worth was not tied to someone else's failures or weaknesses. I could be compassionate without losing my boundaries, supportive without losing my dignity. That realization gave me confidence, resilience, and a sense of peace I had not known before. Michael and I started discussing our future with clarity. No more illusions, no more secrets. We made plans for paying off debts, securing savings, and rebuilding our lives on honest terms. It was not a glamorous process, but it was real. And in that reality, I found hope. I realized that betrayal does not have to be the end. It can be a turning point, a moment when truths are revealed and the foundation of life is tested. If handled with honesty, accountability, and boundaries, it can lead to growth, both individually and together. By the time the year had passed, the heavy weight of shame and uncertainty had lifted. Michael had regained some stability, our home felt lighter, and I felt stronger. The trust that had been broken was not fully restored, but it was being rebuilt slowly, carefully, piece by piece. And in that rebuilding, I found a sense of calm I hadn't known in years, a quiet strength, a renewed sense of self, and the ability to forgive without forgetting. In those quiet moments, I often reflect on what happened, the betrayal, the panic, the revelation, the consequences. I understand now that life is unpredictable, that people make mistakes, and that sometimes the most painful events can teach the deepest lessons. And as I watch Michael work alongside me, shoulder to shoulder, not as a desperate man begging for salvation, but as a partner who understands the cost of his choices, I feel a sense of peace. Not perfect peace, not naive trust, but real human peace, the kind that comes from facing reality, taking responsibility, and moving forward with integrity. Healing is not about forgetting. It's about understanding, reclaiming strength, and choosing how to respond when life tests you. And in our case, it was about finding that balance, supporting, guiding, and holding each other accountable, while never losing sight of who we truly are. Sitting in the quiet of our living room, I often reflect on the journey that brought me here, from the subtle emptiness of our everyday routines, through the shock of betrayal, the chaos of hidden truths, and the long, painstaking process of rebuilding. It wasn't easy. Nothing worth doing ever is. But I've learned that life is as much about how we respond to challenges as the challenges themselves. I think about the mornings I used to wake before Michael, the aroma of coffee filling the air while the house remained silent. Back then, I didn't realize that silence was a warning, that the absence I felt wasn't just distance, but a symptom of secrets hidden behind polite gestures. It's strange how hindsight brings clarity, how moments we once accepted as normal suddenly reveal themselves as signals we were too distracted to notice. The discovery of his hidden financial troubles was a storm that shook the foundation of our lives. It forced me to confront choices I had long avoided, to face anger and disappointment head-on, and to reclaim the agency I had slowly lost to silence. Standing there, watching him plead for help, I realized that forgiveness and action are not the same. I could choose to help, but only on my terms and only with honesty, accountability, and boundaries in place. That distinction changed everything. Watching him face the public consequences of his decisions was humbling for both of us. I saw the world respond, some with judgment, some with compassion, and some simply with quiet acknowledgement of what we were going through. It reminded me that life cannot be lived in hiding. Choices have repercussions, and hiding from them only delays the inevitable. Michael learned it the hard way, and so did I. Rebuilding our life together was neither immediate nor perfect. It required patience, understanding, and an unwavering commitment to truth. Simple acts, shared meals without distraction, conversations with intention, walks where we truly listened, slowly knit together a new rhythm, one based on reality rather than illusion. I discovered in myself a strength I hadn't fully recognized before, the power to forgive without losing my dignity, the clarity to help without losing myself. Healing, I've realized, is not about erasing the past or pretending mistakes never happened. It's about acknowledging the pain, learning from it, and choosing to move forward with honesty and integrity. Michael and I rebuilt trust slowly, carefully, but deliberately. We are not the same as we were, and that's okay. We are stronger for having faced the truth together, and I am grateful for the clarity it brought me, even through the heartbreak. Now, when I sip my morning coffee, I notice the small things. The sunlight on the kitchen counter, the sound of his laughter when he tells a story, the quiet moments where our hands brush accidentally but intentionally. These small, ordinary details remind me that life can be beautiful, even after betrayal, if approached with patience and authenticity. As I reflect on this journey, I want to leave you with one thought. Trust is fragile, but it is also renewable. Boundaries, honesty, and clear communication are the tools we use to rebuild what has been broken. And sometimes, the strength we discover in ourselves is what allows us to help others, or to step away when necessary. I want to ask you, the viewer, something to reflect on and share. If someone you trusted deeply hid a life-changing secret from you, would you forgive them and help them, or would you walk away to protect yourself? Take a moment to think about that. Your answer is personal, but sharing it in the comments can spark reflection and conversation. I would love to hear your perspective. Thank you for taking this journey with me. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe, and share so we can continue bringing stories that touch the heart, reveal human truths, and explore the depth of relationships and life's challenges. Remember, life is messy, love is complicated, and sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that teach us the most. And as you leave this story, think about the strength you hold inside yourself, the strength to face betrayal, the courage to act with integrity, and the wisdom to choose what is best for your own life.